Part 2, Graphical Properties of Inverse Functions. Properties of the graphs of inverse functions f and g. So let's look at this graph. We have the blue graph represents f and the green graph represents g. So the domain of f is the range of g and the domain of g is the range of f. That is always true for inverse functions because when we switched the x's and y's, we also switched the domain and range. Also, notice that if f of a equals b, if and only if g of b equals a. So here we have f of 4 equals 1 is a point on the graph of f, and fg of 1 equals 4 gives us a point on the graph of g. Also notice that f and g are symmetric about the line y equals x, which makes sense because we switched the x's and y's. So let's sketch the inverse of f on the same axis, and we'll talk about the domain and range. So let's look at f first. So for f, our domain would be the possible x values. So the x value on the very left is -5, and the x value on the right is 4. And the range, we look bottom to top. So the very bottom y value is -3, and the very top y value is 3. So there's our domain and range of f. Now let's think about what f inverse might look like. Okay, so to graph the inverse of this function, I'm just going to switch all the x's and y's. So for this point, I have the point 5, -3, which means the inverse has the point -3, -5. So here's the point -3, -5. Let's go to the point -2, 1. So the inverse will have the point 1, -2. So here's the point 1, -2. Next, let's go to the point 1, 3. The inverse is going to have a point at 3, 1. And then the last one, 4, 1. So the inverse will have a point at 1, 4. So there's our inverse. And if we look at this, my graph's not perfect, of course, but it does look like it's probably symmetric about that line, y equals x. Let's find the domain and range of the inverse of f. So the domain of the red part of the graph that we just drew goes from -3 to 3. The very left point has an x value of -3. The very right point has an x value of 3. And the range, so the bottom part, the bottom point, the very bottom part here is -5. And it goes all the way up to this point right here, which was 1, 4. So that y value is 4. So the domain and range are switched. The domain of f is the same as the range of f inverse, and the range of f is the same as the domain of f inverse. So given this function, f of x equals x minus square root of x minus 4 plus 5, let's find the inverse and determine the domain and range of both f of x and f inverse of x. So let's first find the domain of f of x. When we have a square root function, we know whatever is inside the square root needs to be greater than or equal to 0, which means that x has to be greater than or equal to 4. So the domain of f goes from 4 to infinity. X's just have to be greater than or equal to 4. So let's find the inverse now, and then we'll go from there. So if I find the inverse, I'm going to write this first as y equals the square root of x minus 4 plus 5. Switch the x's and y's, and I have x equals the square root of y minus 4 plus 5. And now I'm going to solve for y. So first I'll isolate the square root by subtracting 5 from both sides. And then I will square both sides, and I get x minus 5 squared equals y minus 4, and then add 4 to both sides. So my inverse of f, I'm writing this in inverse notation, is x minus 5 squared plus 4. Let's go back and look at the range of f of x. We said that the domain of f of x is 4 to infinity, but if I want to think about the range, if I were to graph f of x, I'm not going to draw the whole graph, but just thinking about what the graph looks like. The square root of x starts here at 0, 0 and looks something like that. But now we've moved this to the right 4 and up 5. So I have a point of 4, 5. is where this point from 0, 0 got moved to. So my graph looks something like this. So my range then goes from 5 to infinity, and the graph of a square root function will go up forever. So our range got changed to 5 to infinity. So now if I look at the domain and range of the inverse function, our domain has to be 5 to infinity, and our range 4 to infinity, because I switched the domain and range when I found the inverse.